right, so we have done, just in the last 2 years, I've done more than 37 town halls. I don't know if that's the most of any member of Congress, but it's up there pretty good. And we had engaged amazingly during that time over 37,000 of my constituents in conversations like the one we're going to have tonight. So we're constantly fine-tuning the program. I'm constantly looking for ways to make it move well, to be inclusive, and to make it a really valuable experience for everyone. And sometimes we do issue-specific town halls. I have done, for example, we've got some friends from the Alzheimer's Association here in the front row. We've done an Alzheimer's town hall with caregivers and family members of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. We have done town halls on preserving Social Security, on holding President Trump accountable to the Constitution and the rule of law. We've done town halls on climate. I did a wonderful town hall at Dominican University on gun violence that included young student ambassadors from schools all over the North Bay. And sometimes we just do wide open town halls. That's what we're going to do tonight. This is no particular subject. Everything is in play. And because it's so wide open, and because we have satellite seating in a different room and people watching on another feed, the format that we think will make us cover the most ground is to use question cards. All right, I can cover about 2 to 3 times more questions if we do it by cards than if we just throw the microphones around, and you can probably imagine, why that may be. But I want to assure you that if you came here with a question, we are going to get you an answer. So please just throw your hand up if you have a question at any time. My staff is going to be circulating these question cards as we go forward. And we do not filter them, we do not screen them. I want to hear from you whether you agree with me or whether you vehemently disagree with me. The one thing my staff may do to avoid redundancy and let us cover as many topics and questions as possible is they may combine them. So if 10 people are asking the same question, we're not going to do that 10 different times. We'll do it once. And hopefully, in that way, we will cover an awful lot of ground in the time that we have together tonight. I want to assure everyone that my intention is to always have a very civil and respectful conversation. Again, if you disagree with me, I still want to hear from you, and I think there's incredible value in us listening to each other and having a dialogue. I think the tone of our politics in this country is way too shrill and way too vitriolic, and we can do our own part in setting a better political discourse by showing that we can do it right here tonight. Now, let's go ahead and get started. I want to offer a few thoughts by way of update on what's happening in Washington, D.C. Obviously, we're underway with a new Congress, the 116th Congress. This is my new member pen, and it says in fine print, 116th Congress. That's a huge change in a lot of ways, because for the last 2 years we've had unified Republican control of the government, the White House and both branches of Congress. What that has meant is that effectively for the past 2 years there hasn't been any oversight of the executive branch. It just hasn't happened in any kind of a meaningful way. That is about to change. Hopefully it changes in a way that you'll all be confident it's being done very responsibly and not in sort of a partisan retribution kind of mode. But there's really important oversight work that Congress is supposed to do to carry out our constitutional purpose, and it hasn't been happening for 2 years. So you'll see it, and that alone is going to be a tremendous change from the past couple of years. We're also going to have a very different policy agenda that you're going to start to see pushed through, at least in the House of Representatives. There are some things I think we can do together, even with a divided Congress and President Trump. I think bringing down prescription drug prices and going big on infrastructure investments and maybe even some progress on immigration policy, all of those things can be reasonably within reach in this Congress. But there's some other things that are going to be harder to get done in divided government. We still need to put, I think, our ideas and our vision for the country forward for the American people to see. So I'm looking forward to being part of that, and I think it's going to be a bold and exciting policy agenda. Now, we were delayed in getting underway with all of this work because the 116th Congress began in the middle of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. 34 days. Thankfully, it wasn't the entire federal government, it's about 25% of it. But a couple of things about this government shutdown that thankfully we've now put behind us, I hope. First of all, this was not a partisan thing. It's important to remember that in December, under unified Republican control of the White House and both branches of Congress, we were all set to go. We had an agreement with broad bipartisan support, passed unanimously out of the United States Senate, in fact, to fund the government, keep the lights on. At the last minute, after getting a lot of pressure from folks like Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh, right-wing radio, Donald Trump suddenly reneged on the deal and said he had to include $5.7 billion for new border wall facilities or else it was a no-go. And that's what put us into this government shutdown. Very important to remember that this happened under unified control of the government by our Republican colleagues. And the new Congress kind of inherited this shutdown. The other important thing about this shutdown is the tremendous damage it did. You know about the 800,000 federal employees who suffered needlessly because they had to miss 2 pay periods without a paycheck. That's a huge deal to people that are not wealthy. They go into public service to do important work for all of us, not to get rich. And it's a huge deal to miss 2 paychecks. And so when Wilbur Ross or Steve Mnuchin or one of the other plutocrats in this administration tell you, well, they can just go borrow money, it's not that simple. Even the credit unions that were willing to extend credit to these folks were going to be charging interest. There were all sorts of other complications. My office was hearing stories every single day about public employees in my district that were being deeply, deeply hurt. I could fill up this entire town hall with some of those stories, but it was very harmful to them. Super harmful for a lot of the small businesses and folks out there in the private sector that do work with these government agencies, even though the employees affected will get back pay. Not so for independent contractors and consultants and small businesses that were impacted by this government shutdown. They're just out of luck. So there was a ripple effect through the economy. There was damage to our natural resources as our national parks, in many cases, shut down. You've probably seen some of the terrible stories about Joshua Tree and the damage, irreparable damage that occurred to some of these ancient natural resources, and that happened all over the country. Beyond that, there was damage to people's faith in our government and our government institutions, and we got a lot of work to do to try to claw back that credibility and that public faith in government that has been shaken by events like this. So I'm really interested in making sure that we never do this again, and I'm going to be working with my colleagues to try to think about that. It's not a simple thing to try to figure out a way to codify a mechanism that prevents future government shutdowns. It's complicated, but there are some ideas out there, and I'm going to be working with colleagues, hopefully across the aisle, to just say this is the end of using government shutdowns as a negotiating tactic in politics. Last thought on this, as painful as it was, it's also very important that at the end of this 34-day stunt, President Trump got nothing. All right? The terms and conditions that he accepted at the end of it were exactly what was on the table in the middle of December. We were all ready to do that before the shutdown happened. It was very important to me, and I think many of us, to show him that this doesn't work as a tactic. So getting nothing was an important outcome to hopefully not make this an annual drill with this president. So on Tuesday, I'll go back to Washington, and Tuesday night's the State of the Union address. I have mixed feelings about that. It is my job to be there. It's in the House chamber. There is an official purpose and function that I think has to be honored, so I will be there to listen, but I'm afraid that what I'm going to hear is a lot of the same tired, divisive rhetoric, a lot of fear-mongering, a lot of over-the-top boastfulness that will have the fact-checkers going crazy and melting down all evening long. And what I think going to be thinking about, and what I know we're going to talk about tonight, is the real State of the Union. All right, and so I just want to tell you that from my point of view, even though the economic top lines in this country look pretty good, the stock market is still fairly strong, employment, unemployment numbers, consumer confidence, all of that is, you know, in a range that, you know, one would say is pretty good. Everything is not okay in this country, and I'm deeply concerned. I'm concerned about the values and the norms and the institutions that hold our country together, because they are being threatened and torn apart like I've never seen before by this administration. I'm concerned about the rule of law, which is the glue to our democracy. It is under assault like we have not seen at any time in modern history, with this authoritarian president who, as I mentioned, has been allowed to kind of run roughshod without oversight, without checks and balances for the last 2 years. I'm concerned about our reputation in the world. You know, I'm rapidly seeing our reputation become one of a country that doesn't keep its word, that has an impulsive president that can't be trusted. Our allies don't have confidence. I've done some traveling in the last 6 months. I've been to South Korea, I've been to the United Kingdom. Our allies are deeply concerned about where our country is heading. I'm concerned about the integrity of our democracy and how it's being undermined by the corruption in this administration at the very highest levels. Corruption like I don't remember ever seeing in American history. Sometimes in plain view, like what happened with the lifting of sanctions on Oleg Deripaska in the last few days, and the effect that that's going to have. I'm concerned about decades of progress this country's made on civil rights and inclusion and tolerance, all of which is being threatened. Folks are wanting to take us backward on things I never thought we'd go backward on. And I'm concerned that even very basic things that we take for granted, like decency and just keeping your word, and things like acknowledging facts and science, all of those things are under attack right now. Because of this crazy political climate that President Trump, unfortunately, has created. There's really something deeply rotten about it. And of course, I'm concerned about our clean air and our water and the livability of this planet, because all of that has been put in jeopardy by this administration and its short-sighted vision, the fact that it's basically handed the keys of our federal government over to the fossil fuel industry. So the State of the Union is not good as far as I'm concerned, but I also want to tell you I think the state of our union is surprisingly resilient and hopeful. And I think that the necessary correction and pushback against all of these things that at least keep most of us up at night, I'm sure, that correction has begun. And I think you're going to see incredible progress in the months and years ahead. So I'm excited about it. And with that, let's dive into your questions and cover as much as we can. All right, so William is a Coast Guard veteran and is asking how we are going to keep his Coast Guard brothers and sisters from being used in the next shutdown. What am I going to do about the rollback of environmental regulations and the dismantling of the EPA? Okay, there are a couple things in there. I can't tell you the mechanics yet of how we're going to prevent the next shutdown statutorily, but I'm working on it. I'm determined to find a way that at least temporarily would, to summarize a bill that I'm probably going to co-sponsor in the next few days by my colleague Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, it would say that whenever we go into a shutdown mode, there would immediately be a 90-day continuing resolution and existing funding levels to kind of provide a cooling off or status quo period. So that's one way to at least provide more time to avoid a shutdown. Now my worry about that is if that's an automatic provision, it may become something that automatically happens every year. So I want to keep working on it, but I do want to promise you that I'm really determined to find a way to just take this government shutdown mechanism off the table. It's so cynical and so destructive. As for the environmental regulations and dismantling the EPA, I think oversight is a huge part of the answer. We need to shine a very bright light on the conflicts of interest and the corruption and all of the rollbacks that are underway. But we also need to slow them down. This administration is not going to be in office forever. So for example, I'm concerned about a bunch of stuff happening in Alaska right now. They are trying to fast track a bunch of drilling in the Arctic Refuge. And that's something that they snuck into their tax cut bill. a couple of years ago. You didn't realize that in addition to slashing taxes for billionaires and corporations, they were opening up the Arctic National Refuge for oil and gas drilling? They did that. And many of the Republicans that in the past have joined me in trying to preserve that area as wilderness really only grudgingly went along with that tax bill. Some of them even voted no for that reason. So it was very controversial. And now they're really in a hurry to grant leases, because if they can get leases out the door for all that oil and gas drilling, then when a Democratic administration comes along and tries to stop it, the company with that lease can bring a takings lawsuit. And it becomes much, much harder to prevent them from moving forward with drilling. So slowing them down is really important. And I intend to do everything I can by way of the oversight process to slow them down and to facilitate some of the court challenges that are underway already to slow them down. And that's going to be the case with a lot of these environmental rollbacks. Prevent them from actually going through the final rulemaking process and hopefully get a new administration in office in time to stop it. All right, so Rhett, where are you, Rhett? This young man is an incredible leader and an advocate. He's a cancer survivor and has been an inspiration for many of us. And Rhett is asking if I am going to support legislation for universal health care like Kamala Harris. I'm not as compelling as Kamala Harris, but yeah, I'm going to support that. I've been supporting various versions of this, sometimes called Medicare for All, sometimes single payer, for as long as I've been a legislator. I think we have a window of opportunity to really move forward on this. I don't think in this Congress we're going to realize the full picture of Medicare for All. But I think for the first time, we're going to be able to have hearings on it. And we're going to be able to call witnesses and really begin to demystify, what some folks are going to claim as socialism, et cetera. Those old canards that they keep throwing at universal national health insurance aren't persuading people the way they used to. More and more people, and more physicians, actually healthcare providers, are so tired of being jerked around by private insurance companies that they are ready to try something new. And one way we may be able to get there is to allow early buy-in to Medicare for people 50 through 65. That's a really tough risk pool for the private sector to insure. A lot of private plans don't want to cover people in that age group. That's where they like to throw up things like pre-existing condition restrictions and all kinds of fine print in your insurance plans. But Medicare would benefit by having that group in the risk pool. That's actually a healthier risk pool than the folks over 65 that Medicare currently serves. And you can price it in a way that would be competitive on the exchanges and would also actually help the Medicare trust fund. So it's just a win-win, makes all kinds of sense, and I'm co-sponsoring a bill to do that. I'm co-sponsoring all kinds of bills to just broaden this public insurance option. There's one to allow Medicaid to be an option for people to purchase on the exchanges. So lots of good ideas out there, and for the first time we're going to have hearings, and I think really move the public debate forward. Those are important incremental steps towards what I think we all want. So thanks for the question, Ben. So Leland, who is a Vietnam combat veteran, asks me about how I define the social contract within the framework of our Constitution, our constitutional democratic republic, and how I will facilitate the parties' need to define clearly H.R. 1. So I'll tell you a little bit about H.R. 1, so that people actually understand how important and essential the bill is and how it relates to that social contract. All right, this is making me feel like I'm back in political science class. I love it. We're going to start talking about Locke and Rousseau here in a moment if we're not careful. But look, democracies like ours happen because of the consent of the governed. That's the way it works. And that social contract has to be honored, and it's not honored when you don't really have a functioning democracy, where special interests have sort of hijacked that democracy. And the outcomes are all favorable to the plutocrats and the folks who are increasingly concentrating the wealth and power and adverse to the majority of the people. So we've got to get that back, and that's what H.R. 1 is all about. H.R. 1 includes a bunch of ethics reforms that should be common sense. I didn't even know until I started having colleagues in Congress get indicted that members of Congress could own shares of publicly traded companies that have business before their committee in Congress, and then do a bunch of insider trading in that company. This is just appalling, the kind of ethical standards that are allowed under current law, and that is going to change under H.R. 1. We're going to tighten that way up. Obviously, we've got work to do on voting rights, on restoring the ease of voting, the integrity of voting. One of the ways that we can address this big money problem we have in politics is by empowering small donors. And so H.R. 1 has a provision that I really love that empowers small donors. It creates a refundable tax credit for every American voter to be used as a campaign contribution in a federal election. And there's a matching fund that will match that 5 to 1. And so I think the credit is $75, all right? But you do the 5 to 1 match, and that becomes a pretty nice contribution. And suddenly, if a campaign agrees to be funded by small dollar contributions, these matching funds open up, and suddenly there's a way to finance a serious, viable congressional campaign with your constituents in living rooms and in small gatherings with these little refundable tax credits amplified by the matching fund. And you don't have to spend all your time with the big donors and at K Street events. So that's kind of exciting to me too. We're also going to tackle gerrymandering. We're going to do what California did. You know how it used to be, even in California, it was like the party in power in a dark room, drew the lines basically to where the politicians picked their constituents and not the other way around. And that really needs to end. There are some states right now that would be blue states if we had fairly drawn districts. Texas would be one of them. Pennsylvania, if you want to see the difference between gerrymandering and fair district drawing, Pennsylvania had to have its districts redrawn last year by court order, and it went from a overwhelming majority Republican delegation to an overwhelming Democratic delegation in one election cycle, just with fair districts. So we need to create independent, nonpartisan commissions, just like California has, in every single state. And if we do that, it's going to be healthier for our democracy, and by the way, it'll be good for Democrats too. All right, Frank asks, when will the public see Trump's tax returns? We're going to get those tax returns, Frank. But I think President Trump is going to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court. So it could take a while. But I feel pretty confident that at the very least, the Ways and Means Committee chair and other key people in the new Congress are going to get to see it. And under current law, if they believe it's in the public interest to disclose it, which it kind of has to be, right? We need to see what's in those tax returns. Then the rest of us will see it. That's assuming somebody doesn't leak it between now and then. So I think all of those things taken together give us a pretty high probability of seeing those tax returns, hopefully in the next 6 months to a year. That would be my expectation. Laura is asking, when it became clear that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election with enough influence that it leaves the accuracy of the vote in doubt, what legal options do we have? What is the recourse for an illegally conducted election? That's it's a terrible thing to think about, isn't it? I don't know that we'll ever be able to say that the vote changed. As a matter of common sense, I think they obviously impacted the outcome of the election. I mean, we're finding out more and more that in the middle of that Billy Bush, grab 'em episode, where everyone in this country was saying there is no way this man becomes president of the United States, right? I was saying it. I mean, my wife will tell you that day I pronounced Trump dead as a candidate. I said there's no doubt about this. But on that very day, Roger Stone's and WikiLeaks and the Russians were going to work to drop this new narrative that changed the subject. And we know that happened. The idea that that did not swing 70 or 80,000 votes in 3 states that were critical of the outcome of the Electoral College is inconceivable. I think it absolutely affected the outcome of the election. But there is no provision in U.S. law for a do-over of a presidential election. It's not like the situation in North Carolina right now that we're dealing with, right? Where we have a race that was within 600 votes that was not yet certified. And that, I think, is the key. It was not yet certified, and evidence started coming forward of incredible improprieties on the Republican side that will probably give us a do-over in that election. And I actually think when that's done, Democrats will end up getting 1 more seat in the 116th Congress, because we were on course to win that. But we don't have a similar mechanism for the presidential election, I'm sorry to tell you. All right, why haven't I been a stronger voice against Trump? Sorry. I'll keep reading. Do you support impeachment? All right, well, good, fair question. Look, I'm always open to ways I can push back more strongly against Donald Trump, but going back to the very beginning, I took heat because I wouldn't even attend Donald Trump's inauguration. So I smelled something very, very rotten about this guy from the very beginning. And it was not just the fact that he wasn't my chosen candidate. I mean, anyone else, even though I wanted the other candidate to win, with anyone else, I would have dutifully been there for the inauguration. But the way he was already dividing our country, all the evidence that was coming forward about foul play with Mike Flynn and secret back channels involving Kushner and Kislyak, I mean, the red flags were already waving really big for me, even before he was sworn into office. So I would like to think I have been pushing back. In fact, I was already holding town halls about how to hold this president accountable under the Constitution, even before some of the worst stuff. One of our town halls, in fact, I'll never forget, was scheduled for Dominican University, and the day, literally 5 minutes before I walked into the town hall, Trump fired Comey. And so we had these constitutional scholars, and we had the most amazing conversation about where do we go from here. And it has only continued to snowball since then. So look, if you can think of other ways that I should be pushing back on President Trump, tell me. But I have signed on co-sponsored articles of impeachment. I've also been honest in telling people we're nowhere close to 218 votes for impeachment right now. So our focus really, we can talk about impeachment. I would love to actually achieve impeachment, but our focus needs to be on these other modes of accountability. The tax returns, protecting the Mueller investigation, the litigation right now that is trying to hold Trump accountable under the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. I'm a plaintiff in litigation against Donald Trump right now under the Emoluments Clause. So, I'm willing to do more, but I am trying to do everything I can on that front, and I appreciate the question. So Joe asks, when can we get rid of the Electoral College? What are you doing personally to reduce the perception that the Democratic Party is bi-coastal? And where are Trump's tax returns? All right, we've covered asked and answered on the tax returns. On the bi-coastal part, you know, as a Marin County, Californian, I'm limited in my ability to address that perception issue with the Democratic Party. But I do try to do it just by having good quality relationships and collaboration with colleagues from other parts of the country and across the aisle wherever I can. I think it's an unfair resentment of California and the Democratic Party that we are coastal elites. I frankly think the people of California are some of the most generous, innovative, philanthropic, visionary people the world has ever seen, and we should be proud of that. We should not hide from it. But it's something we have to be sensitive of, and our delegation in Congress is huge, of course. So yeah, there's a little natural resentment, and the New York delegation is the second biggest one in the Democratic Party, so we get a little of that bi-coastal pushback, and we we have to be mindful of it. But we're certainly going to keep pushing for California. That's not an option. The Electoral College, I would love to get rid of the Electoral College. But constitutionally, I think it's really hard to do. And I think as interesting as it is to imagine a critical mass of states passing some sort of Electoral College workaround, and there's some interesting ideas being floated about how that might be able to happen. The straight-up amendment of the Constitution to change the Electoral College is not going to happen. You're not going to see small states agree to dilute their outsized political power that this mechanism gives them. It's undemocratic, right? But it's undemocratic in their favor, and so they're probably not going to vote to give it up. If we can find a way to move to a popular vote-based outcome, I'll support it. I'll try to get you there. But I got to be realistic. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And I think the smarter thing to do is to just accept that these are the rules, and we've got to win under these rules. We should have won the last election under those rules. So it's not like the Electoral College makes it impossible for Democrats to win national elections. It's very possible. And we're going to just have to find a way, I think, to do it. All right, Jean is asking, are you concerned about the candidacy of Howard Schultz as an independent? Might this cause the Democrats to lose in 2020? I'm not a fan of Howard Schultz. In fact, I've been thinking, Jenny, that we should only go to Pete's Coffee from now on. It's great that he's such a success. It's great that he wants to be president of the United States, and I'm sure he loves his country. But I don't think this is a political moment for billionaires that think that progressive politics are too radical. That's just not this moment that we're in. And I was also disturbed by some of the reporting today that he hardly ever votes. You know, so to me, that's like that's the kind of arrogance that we do not need right now to caffeinate our democracy, which is what we do. Right? All right, David asks, are you going to support H.R. 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act of 2019? Concept is endorsed by Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, a bunch of Nobel laureates, and other fine folks. So this bill is a fee and dividend bill, so it does carbon pricing, which is a really important thing and a good thing that I support. I love the fact that it's bipartisan. We actually have a handful of Republicans joining some Democrats in a bill that prices carbon. That's a good thing. I want to encourage and foster that kind of collaboration and that kind of progress. Here's the problem with this bill. We've only got 10 to 12 years to decarbonize the world economy, or we're in a world of hurt. I think most experts agree that relying on market mechanisms alone, we're just too late in the game for that. We are going to need to price carbon, but we're also going to need some command and control regulation and some caps and all kinds of other things. And this bill suspends that as a trade-off for the pricing of carbon in the energy sector alone. This is another limitation of the bill. It only applies to one sector, energy. It exempts agriculture and transportation and all the other sectors that have to be part of the fix, right? But as a trade-off to get some carbon pricing in the energy sector, we suspend regulations under the Clean Air Act and we exempt all these others. No, it's not good enough, but it's a step in the right direction. So I'm sorry, that may be a disappointing answer. I'm not going to co-sponsor it, but what I might do is steal some good parts from it and put it in a good bill. Larry asks, which major issues are you a solver, quote unquote solver, and a fighter? It's an interesting question. So, some things that come to mind: a woman's right to choose. I'm going to fight. Civil rights, voting rights, equal rights. I'm going to fight. I'm not interested in solving anything short of a fight, because I think that's the only thing you can do. In terms of how we tackle all these, like carbon pricing and super complex issues of how we manage our oceans and fisheries to have sustainable fisheries. And there's just a world of collaboration and good ideas and problem solving, a lot of which doesn't need to be partisan. And so there's all kinds of things in which I guess I would say I'm happy to be a solver. All right? I think you got to kind of take each issue as it comes and think about what are the core values that it implicates. Sometimes there's a core value that really just can't be compromised. Marcy asks, in the wake of the terrible fires, hurricanes, and now the polar vortex, what kind of progress do you think can be made on the issue of climate? Well, first of all, if the president and Scott Walker and other people are telling you that because it's cold in Wisconsin, we need some global warming, send them to Australia, okay? Because on the other side of the world, they're having record heat waves, and it's just always really disingenuous and silly, frankly, to point to any given weather event and declare that it either proves or disproves climate change. But I do think this extreme weather, the more it becomes regular, the more it becomes something that we're all living with all the time, and these disasters that you referenced there, Marcy, I think it provides an opportunity to bring allies to the solution side of climate change. I'm going to try to do that. So I should have mentioned at the outset that the new Congress, I also have a new committee assignment. I'm going to be chairing a really important subcommittee on water, oceans, and wildlife. One of the things that I want to do, because I've been 6 years in the wilderness, right, in the minority party of a very majoritarian institution, and I've been taking notes on things that I think we need to do better. And one of the things I've noticed is that we have all of these battle lines that we've drawn, and we just fight about them. And there's this temptation, now that the gavels have switched, to just continue the same fight without skipping a beat, but with the gavel in different hands. We just sort of swap jerseys and the game goes on. I would like to try to do something different. And what's distressed me about Congress is somewhere along the line, people just stopped trying to find common facts and common foundational understandings of things. So on these issues that I'm now in charge of, water, oceans, and wildlife, we're going to have a series of foundational hearings. I'm going to reach out to my Republican colleagues and ask them if there are some witnesses we can agree on together, and see if we can establish a common set of facts before we resume the fight, right? I'm not naive, I realize that may not be possible, but nobody's bothered to do that in a really long time, and I just have this sense that we got to get back to doing things right, to first looking at the science and the facts, seeing what we can agree on, and then if we have to have some fights about what to do about it, we will. But we're going to spend the next several months with climate change featuring really prominently into those foundational kind of baseline setting hearings. And I'm hoping we will bring some new allies, or at least identify some areas of cooperation through that strategy. Elizabeth asks, in order of easiest to more difficult, please describe the process of undoing the harm to the environment created by the Trump administration after he is gone, which is a nice thing to think about. Look, it's not going to be easy. It's real. I mean, on this climate issue, we've lost time, okay? We were really making progress, and the U.S. brought the world together around the Paris Agreement. Every nation in the world except us now has signed on to that framework. And what we should have been doing these past 2 years is really making sure that everyone makes good on their commitments and building the case for even more ambitious commitments and goals all over the world as part of a multinational collaboration. And we just lost the last 2 years because we went the opposite direction. One of the first things that I hope to do in this new Congress, I'm going to be authoring a resolution. It's not binding, it's kind of a messaging thing, but it will simply say that the Congress of the United States believes the United States should stay in the Paris Accord. And I have a Republican co-sponsor on that resolution. My hope is that we can actually pass it out of the House, send it over to the Senate. I hope it's somewhere in the Senate, but either way, the world will get a really important message that maybe this backsliding in America for these past 2 years is over. and that we're going to get back in the game, and we're going to join the world community to step up and solve this problem. So that's one of the many things I'm going to try to do on that. Now, Susan is asking, now that Dems have control of the House, will you be trying to push for incentives for energy conservation, clean energy production, and electric vehicle purchases? And the answer to that is definitely. In fact, I was just meeting with some folks from NRDC and other environmental groups last week with some interesting ideas on energy efficiency and some tax incentives there. We've got to expand the clean vehicle incentives that we have right now. So the great news about greenhouse gas reductions in this country is that from the energy sector, they're declining. Some of that is mixed news because it's come from natural gas that's replaced coal, and along with that comes a lot of methane leakage, and it's not a long-term solution. But the energy sector's been getting a lot cleaner. Transportation has not. And with Scott Pruitt and the EPA trying to roll back the clean car standards, it's really important that we get that back on track. That's another one that I've had some success in getting Republicans to work with me. Because California set these very high clean car standards. 12 other states followed California. Some of those are red states. All right? And so I've got some Republican colleagues who want to work with me to push back on the administration, reinstate the ability of states to lead with high clean car standards, and the industry's okay with that too. The industry wasn't asking Scott Pruitt and Donald Trump to roll back efficiency standards. They just wanted to do it because the oil companies told them they wanted to do it. Right? It's really insidious and wrong-headed. But the tax incentive piece for electric cars is also very important. Obviously, Tesla's bumping up against the cap. We've got to provide more credits. We want to extend solar credits. So we've got a lot of work to do. I don't know if we can do it all in this Congress, but we're going to get started and we're going to try. Cindy asks, are there particular bills regarding immigration reform that I am supporting? Yes, there are. And I'll tell you, I would have supported the comprehensive immigration reform that the United States Senate passed on a bipartisan basis my first year in Congress. This was in 2013, I believe, or 2014. And it was looking really good. President Obama would have signed it, but Paul Ryan hit the brakes and would not allow it to come to a vote in the House because he didn't want his members going on record on something that he knew some of them would probably lose their seats over, right? They'd be accused of amnesty and other things. So that's really where it went off the rails, and we haven't been able to make any progress since. It's gotten a lot worse, obviously, with Donald Trump. So I've got a whole bunch of bills I'm co-sponsoring. There's a DREAM Act that I think is like the least we can do right now for hundreds of thousands of young people that are Americans by any reasonable measure. They need to be freed of this fear of deportation. There are narrower versions of that apply to people that maybe have served in the military and done other types of service. Those ought to be really easy bipartisan actions, but they're going to be tough with Donald Trump and with some of the folks in the Senate. I'm not hopeful, really, that immigration reform can happen until we win a few more elections and probably get this guy out of the White House. But I'll keep trying. I'll keep co-sponsoring a lot of bills that I think all of you will support and agree with. I just don't know that the politics are going to be there until we change the presidency. All right, will I put forward legislation to require publication of special counsel Mueller's report? That's a great idea, huh? I was really pleased to see that, it was Senator Coons and Senator Grassley teaming up. Grassley surprised me, teaming up on a bill to do just that. We really need to protect that report and to make sure that it is produced so that we can all see what's in it. It's vitally important. And I don't feel comfortable that Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker is going to be looking out for us and make sure that there's transparency. I'm not comfortable that probably the next Attorney General, Mr. Barr, I don't think his first instinct is going to be towards transparency and honest dealing. So I'm worried about it, and I do think we need to try to pass a bill. Of course, President Trump would veto that bill, so it's no simple thing. But in everything we do, I think we got to send the message, we are watching you, and you are going to be in our microscope. There's going to be extreme accountability. Even someone like Matthew Whitaker, given the power that we now have, at least on the House side, with oversights and subpoenas and the ability to hold witnesses in contempt of Congress, these are powerful, powerful tools that are going to make it very, very hard for him to hide findings of the special counsel and to avoid doing the right thing. All right, James asks, how much would your 100 by 50 Act cost us as taxpayers? Is it similar to AOC's Green New Deal? Yeah, so the Green New Deal, you've probably heard about this, and AOC is this new internet sensation that I serve with, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This 29-year-old dynamo. Kind of a force of nature, but yeah, she has been working with a group called the Sunrise Movement around their vision of addressing this climate problem. They call it a Green New Deal. Now, it's a series of targets. It's like, 100% clean vehicles by 2035. I can't remember exactly. It's a bunch of things in different sectors, different goals to decarbonize the economy and create a lot of jobs. So it's great. I love the vision. I support everything in there. I've also been working on a whole bunch of bills that are very compatible and very similar. They may not be packaged as the Green New Deal, but I support their work, and I think they're going to like the bills that I'm working on. So you were asking, though, because I started 100 by 50 Act. Yeah, so this is an attempt to set one of those goals, 100% clean energy in the country by 2050. And the question is, how much would it cost? I don't know. I guess I would flip the question around and say, how much does it cost not to do that? And I think that's a much more sobering thing to think about. Right? We know that the cost of not doing that, you see it in public health, you see it in respiratory and other public health costs that we suffer every time we burn fossil fuels for energy. You see it in what we're doing to the planet. The costs are never really calculated when you talk about the status quo. When you talk about changing the status quo, in fact, just this week in the Natural Resources Committee, one of my Republican colleagues wanted to propose a committee rule that would require any climate legislation, before it could be voted on, you had to quantify the exact number of jobs it would cost and the exact amount of sea level rise it would reduce, right? So I got to somehow quantify, how many millimeters of sea level rise reduction I'm going to get out of my clean energy bill, the exact amount of greenhouse gas reduction, the exact temperature change in the global, climate. It's ridiculous. So I guess I push back a little bit against this notion that to change this destructive status quo that we're on, we have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. I think we need to acknowledge this car is heading for a cliff. There's going to be an enormous cost if we don't take some of these steps. And I tend to think, we'll do the analysis. We will look at the impacts on jobs and the economy. But my strong sense is it's going to be a positive. That's been the experience in California. It was just a few years ago when I was in the state legislature and we were trying to do things like a 33% renewable portfolio standard, right? Which seemed crazy ambitious. The utilities and everyone else, you can't get there from here, right? Well, we're like past it, okay? And we're doing great. So I think we're going to be just fine accelerating this transition to clean energy. And I think the more we embrace it, the more of an economic upside we're going to experience. My plans for the 2020 census. Will I support LGBTQ representation? Will I oppose IDing immigration status? I certainly am pleased that the courts have stepped in to stop the citizenship question. That's a really insidious attempt to drive down participation in the census, and it would really hurt Western states like California. So that's a bad thing. I don't want to see California lose resources and lose representation in the Congress, and I don't want to see people scared of participating in the census. I'll have to think a little more about the LGBTQ representation piece. I haven't been asked about that, and so I'm happy to take a look at that and consider it. Kathleen asks, my question is regarding the fast-track deployment of 5G in our towns, in our neighborhoods, near our homes and schools. Many of your voters are concerned and opposed. I have met with folks on this. many of the leaders in our district are also concerned and racing to write protective ordinances. Even fellow Congresswoman Anna Eshoo recently introduced a bill to restore local control. So where am I on this? I will take a look at Anna Eshoo's bill. That sounds like a good bill. I certainly don't want to see Congress or the telecommunications industry running roughshod over local communities who may have their own thoughts about how these systems get deployed. So I want to protect the ability of my local government colleagues to call the shots on this for their representatives in their community. Isaac asks, Isaac is a student at Miller Creek Middle School. Second week of April, he will be taking a trip to Washington. All right. I'm wondering if you think the government will be shut down. It's heartbreaking. See what I meant about loss of faith in government? Kids can't even take a field trip to Washington without wondering. Okay, just because I'm curious to know if I will be in D.C. at that time. All right, well, Isaac, I don't think the government is going to be shut down the second week of April. And I intend to be there, and I hope you will. Where are you, Isaac? There he is. Okay. You gotta reach out to my office. In fact, my staff is here. We'll get you a card and make sure that your teacher, whoever's leading the field trip, connects with them. And I would love to meet with your class on the steps of the Capitol and talk about our government. I really enjoy meeting with those field trip groups, and I'll see you later. Kerry asks, what recourse does Congress have to counter Trump if he uses the military budget to fund his wall? Now that is a real scenario. In terms of where we go from here, you know we have a temporary deal to keep the lights on in the government for the next 2 weeks. And then I think most of us in Congress assume that we'll have a deal to fund the rest of the fiscal year. Trump will have to decide if it's good enough for him. It's not going to include funding for the wall. I will tell you that. But it will include some things to enhance border security. We're, you know, this little narrative that Democrats want crime and open borders and, you know, drug dealers in your neighborhood. That's not true. You may have read in today's news that I think it was yesterday, at one of the ports of entry border crossings, Customs and Border Patrol intercepted the largest shipment of fentanyl ever to be confiscated. It was in an 18-wheeler truck, I guess, in the wheel well. And we had really good professional personnel on site and technology to detect that stuff, and we busted them. Largest fentanyl bust in American history. And it wasn't at a wall. It was actually at a port event. This is where this stuff comes into the country. And we care about this, and we don't want to see fentanyl coming into our communities. But the answer is not to build a medieval wall over there where trucks are not driving the fentanyl into the country. The answer is invest in the technology and the personnel and the systems that will stop it at the ports of entry where it's coming in. And we're all for it. So you're going to see Democrats propose some extra money for border security, but it's not going to be the medieval border wall. That's just not a serious answer to the problem. So your question kind of gets to what happens then. All right, so my sense is that Trump learned, I hope he learned, that government shutdowns don't work, and he will sign what I think will be a bipartisan government funding bill February 15th. But I don't think he's still in a box that he's created for himself with this wall issue, with his base. Ann Coulter's going to be yelling at him on the radio and calling him names, and he's going to feel like he has to do something. And so my sense is he will declare a national emergency, and he will try to redirect and repurpose funds that either in the defense budget or elsewhere that Congress has appropriated for something else, and we're going to have to challenge him in court. But I've always thought, you know, that's probably where we inevitably end up. And I'm fine taking our chances in court. I think we'll have a good chance there. And I think when Trump loses, he'll then be able to blame the courts. And so, you know, hopefully this whole episode of trying to build the wall will kind of run its course. And in a sense, I hope he hurries up and declares the national emergency and challenge him in court. And I feel pretty good about our chances there. Jim is asking, what are the prospects for a revitalization of the ERA? Was it the ERA or the EPA? I've got a penmanship issue here. ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment? Yeah. Well, I just co-sponsored the ERA. The Jackie Spear, I think, is leading it. I've co-sponsored it for the last few Congresses. I know that there may be, a debate we need to have about that, but I sort of think that's an obvious step that we ought to finish. We were almost there a couple decades ago. And I'd like to make sure we're permanently protecting women's rights in our Constitution. So Barbara asks, Fox dominates the news in rural corners of this country. How can folks in those areas get real news? It's not just rural, unfortunately, but it's a fair question. And I guess my view on this is that we've got to challenge everyone, not just the people that listen to Fox News, but even our own like-minded, progressive neighbors, to stretch their sensibilities and to get multiple sources of information. I will confess to you, I watch MSNBC a lot. I feel like Rachel Maddow it's the one show I tape every night. Because she's always doing a deep dive into the Russia stuff, and I always want to see what she's up to. There's some very smart people on her staff that are doing amazing work. But she's followed up by a show, the Lawrence O'Donnell Show, that I can't watch even for like a minute. He's just shouting, and it's just his opinion all the time, and I'm not learning anything new. I'm not being challenged in any meaningful way. And so I go over to something else, or I just turn it off. And I hope we all will not just listen to whatever echo chamber tells us what we want to hear. I'm kind of surprised that people sit through the entire Lawrence O'Donnell Show like myself. Because I don't think they learn anything. They just hear what they maybe already agree with. And Fox News does the exact same thing on the right. I'm a huge fan of NPR. I think we've got to constantly defend public broadcasting, not just for the reliable source of news it provides, but for the incredible programming for a lot of disadvantaged communities that is taken for granted, that is really important to many folks. And then subscribe to newspapers and support some of the heroes of journalism that are trying to save this industry. I'm so proud of the Washington Post and the New York Times, and even some of our local papers that are keeping the lights on against all odds. So Stacy asks, first, access to housing for low and moderate income families in the North Bay is not equitably available. I work in West Marin. Can you make sure that the Coast Guard sells their Point Reyes property in the next 3 months? Okay. Now that the Coast Guard is funded again, maybe we can have a conversation about that. And then second, what do you think is feasible in a major infrastructure overhaul in the form of a New Deal or WPA? Okay, so in terms of the Coast Guard housing in West Marin, that's something I'm proud to say we were able to pass legislation a couple of Congresses ago, actually. So it is, by law, they are required to offer that to the county of Marin for affordable housing. And Dennis Rodoni and his colleagues are right now trying to negotiate the fair value of that transaction. And that's where it's kind of stuck right now. So I will push. You asked me the next 3 months. I can't guarantee the next 3 months. But Jenny Calloway and the rest of my team are constantly working on this, and I will personally push the Coast Guard to close this deal on acceptable terms for the County of Marin so that we can get this done. It's a great opportunity for affordable housing in a place where it's just hard to come by. In terms of big infrastructure, WPA style, New Deal style infrastructure, I think on transportation infrastructure, we've got a chance of doing something that by modern standards will seem kind of big because we've done nothing in decades, right? But it's not going to be anything like the kind of big WPA-style public works investment that many of us would like to see. I think to make that happen, we're going to need to win some elections and have a new Senate and a new president. But we need to get there. We've got a lot of decaying infrastructure, and just to keep up with where we ought to be on roads and bridges and public transit systems that are in decay right now, we're billions and billions of dollars behind. My hope is that in this Congress we can maybe catch up to where we should be and then build from that in future Congresses and a future administration. Lorelei asks, is there any discussion planned about having direct voter participation for elections, since with current technology the Electoral College could be obsolete? Well, I mean, I think I'm hearing you suggest direct voter participation kind of like initiatives. That's what I think of as direct democracy, instead of having elected representatives call the shots on big issues. You know, the voters in kind of American Idol fashion would dial in their preference. And you're right, I mean, the technology could probably get you there. I'm not sure we want that. And I say that because as much as we hate the way big money and special interests have corrupted the representative democracy that we have, they can game the initiative process too. I mean, Californians know that better than anyone, right? Every election we are bombarded by dark money advertisements telling us what to do on these initiatives that we don't always even understand. And I think, if anything, the California direct democracy experiment needs bringing in. I don't want to get rid of it totally, because they can do really big and important things, but it's a little bit out of control. I also am fresh back from a trip to the United Kingdom, where we see a cautionary tale about direct democracy. Anybody who's following the Brexit story, right? So in the heat of the moment, popular sentiment can just sort of spurt out, and you get a Brexit vote. And then everybody takes the time to think about what this really means and how do we do it. And I will tell you, the UK, and to some extent the global economy that's watching the UK and kind of hanging on this thing, they have no idea how they're going to do this. It's way easier to just say withdraw from the European Union than figuring out all the customs and trade and security and other things that would have to be resolved to prevent total calamity, because their economy is so intertwined. So I don't know that they're heading for a do-over. There's huge resistance to doing that in the UK, but they are definitely paralyzed by this impulsive action because voters are very angry. And I definitely heard on my trip to the UK some of the reasons why they resented the European Union. And you know, there's some pretty valid reasons. I think they should have tried to work them out. As a member, they actually could have formed a pretty big voting bloc in the European Union and done the hard work of reforming some of those things from inside, but they decided to lash out, and now they're just in a wild and unpredictable position. I'd hate to see our country put ourselves in those. You know, we've had some moments of strong populism where we got re-elected Donald Trump. You know, so we could do stuff like that too. Okay. Well, that's true. Good point. Touche. Jetty asks, how does Congress stop an executive order? The answer to that depends on what the executive order is and whether the president actually has authority to carry it out without an act of Congress. And so a great example of an executive order that is not valid and that can be stopped would be some of the early iterations of the Muslim ban from President Trump. He did not have authority under the Constitution or under prior acts of Congress to do some of the things he tried to do, and the courts knocked him down. And then they kind of rewrote it and eventually got to something that the Supreme Court allowed him to do. But the short answer is it's generally done through a court challenge, although it could also be done through the power of the purse, through our putting language in appropriations bills every year that limit the president's ability to carry out an executive order. Edward asks about oil seeps through the ocean floor. This is happening in the Pacific Ocean from natural seepage off the coast of California near Santa Barbara. I know about that. I went to UC. I still got tar on my feet from going to UC Santa Barbara, where there are so many oil rigs already. Will banning offshore drilling increase the amount of oil that naturally flows into the ocean? So this is a great question because it comes up every time we talk about offshore drilling in California. And I've been in hearings where This is the favorite thing that the oil and gas industry likes to say. They like to say that there's natural seepage in the Santa Barbara Channel, and that the oil drilling that we do there takes the pressure off of that and prevents all this yucky oil spilling that nature would be doing. It is totally false, okay? It's like one of these Snopes.com oil industry canards that they keep bringing up. And I have asked the question. I have asked scientists and really credible technical people, because this has come up a lot of times. It's not true. We don't need to drill to prevent oil seepage in Santa Barbara. So Robert asks, why did members of Congress get paid during the government shutdown? Why isn't the health plan offered to members of Congress available to all citizens? Oh, I love that. Let's take the health plan first. I promise you, you do not want my health plan. There is this perception out there that members of Congress have the most gold-plated health plan. And I was kind of excited to get this health plan when I got elected. I was disappointed to find out that Congress is the one body of people required by law to buy their insurance under the Affordable Care Act exchanges. And so I have a silver Kaiser plan under Covered California. I pay crazy deductibles and co-pays. I have no dental insurance to speak of, and I got kids with braces and cavities and just getting hammered with those costs all the time. You do not want a congressional health plan. I think most of you can probably do better than that. It's not great. In terms of why members, but I'm not complaining, by the way. I'm happy to pay the middle-of-the-road health plan. I should not get a gold-plated health plan. Why did Congress continue to get paid during the shutdown? Short answer, because Donald Trump was unable to do what he most wanted to do, which is shut down the legislative branch of government. Okay? And I think if he had that power, you know, think about it. A billionaire who doesn't even take a salary, right? Because he's enriching his family in other ways through his service. He would love to emasculate Congress in that way. And it would create enormous leverage on his side of these negotiations. I just think it would be a terrible mistake. And I don't just say that out of self-interest because, you know, like any of you, I would not want to miss a paycheck. I say that because I think it would be a terrible imbalance in a balance of power between the executive and the legislative branch. James asks, I know drug prices are high, but some, like 80% of the world's drugs, are invented in the U.S. How do you lower costs without killing drug discovery? That's a really good question, especially in a research institution like the Buck here, right? Where you've got all kinds of innovation and science happening that sometimes spins off into new biotech companies that go out and get venture funding and take this risky path to try to cure diseases. And we want that to continue. Marin, we've got all these other wonderful examples of companies that go years without making a profit to hopefully someday be able to cure a really rare and obscure disease that won't make, it in some ways makes no business sense. But because we have a law called the Orphan Drug Act, companies like Marin get a longer patent period and get to recoup all of this extreme investment on the front end to hopefully incentivize them to tackle rare diseases like Pompe's disease and muscular dystrophy and things like that. I want that to continue. I think that's really, really important. But what can't continue is the gouging of consumers that's taking place all over our healthcare system. Sometimes on things that are ubiquitous, like inhalers for people with asthma and other, seemingly simple drugs and medications. So there's been abuse of the generic system. Generics are supposed to be a backstop for consumers that bring drugs down, and we've seen big pharma companies game the system to keep generics out or to manipulate the way generics operate. Fixing that would help with prescription drug costs. I totally support allowing Medicare to negotiate with big pharma. And I think we can do that in a way that's not threatening to the rare disease orphan drug folks like Marin. That's really not so much an issue with Medicare anyway. But that's one of the obvious things we can do. Now, Trump, I guess today, unveiled the latest iteration of how his administration intends to lower prescription drug costs, and it's just more of the same. It's just more of this blind trust in the pharmaceutical industry. The fact that after really promising very specifically on the campaign trail to let Medicare negotiate with drug companies, he has continually declined to go there. And then he put this Azar guy in charge of the agency that manages this. It's just a huge disappointment and a special interest problem that we have in this administration. So we're going to need, unfortunately, to either pass something out of Congress against the lobbying and the power of Big Pharma, or we're going to need a new president who actually follows through on that promise. But I think negotiating Medicare to drug companies is the most obvious step. Someday, if we have to, we may have to actually regulate prices of drugs, but that would really be a risky thing to do on the innovation side and the investment side. That's sort of a last resort if we have to. Elaine asks, how important is it for us to call or write our representatives and take political surveys? And what was the cost of the government shutdown? Elaine says she heard $12.5 billion. I've heard a bunch of different conflicting numbers on the cost of the government shutdown, but suffice that it's billions of dollars. And how important is it to call or write? I think it's important. And you can look at my district, and I've had so many groups come in and say, well, we agree with what you're doing, but should we really bother to let you know? Even when you agree with something I'm doing, knowing how strong the feeling is in my district helps me go back and be a better advocate. It helps me talk to other colleagues in Congress. It helps my staff prioritize things. So there is value, I think, in that communication. There's also value in reaching beyond your representative sometimes. So when you got a situation like this government shutdown, the person who really needed to hear from everybody in America was Mitch McConnell. And so I guess I'm suggesting, be strategic about some of the people that you wouldn't initially think to reach out to, because they take those calls and get those faxes too. All right, Martha asks, how can we pass tax reform? It's hard to do. Tax reform is really hard to do. And that's why it's so devastating that 2 years ago the Republicans used one of those rare moments where we had the numbers, it was on their side, but we had a chance to open up the tax code and change it. And they did it in such a destructive and irresponsible way. Just as a matter of basic policy, when the economy is strong and you're almost at full employment, and by the way, you've got a climbing national debt and deficits are starting to rise, that is not the time to slash taxes. It's just not. It's a time to show fiscal restraint and maybe even raise taxes so you can pay down that debt. You got to be careful with that too, because that can trigger an economic downturn. But we went in the exact wrong direction at the worst possible time, and as a result, they've made it a lot harder for us to reopen that tax code. Because the only thing we can do now, we're going to have to raise taxes. I mean, I'll be very honest with you. The deficit is going to be over $1 trillion in the next year. The debt is at record levels. The economy at some point is going to slow down. Interest rates are ticking up, and so that huge debt is going to cost more and more to service. And you add it all up, and there's no way around. You got to find some more revenues somehow. And you can do all the workarounds you want. You can do creative repatriations of foreign earnings and amnesties and things like that. And, they generally don't work very well. But at some point, we've got to revisit the 40% cut in the corporate tax rate that they gave away 2 years ago. We didn't need to go that far. I would have worked with Republicans on a slight reduction in corporate taxes, because if you look at the rest of the world, our corporate tax rate was a little too high. We could have bumped it down a little bit, and I would have tried to negotiate some other changes, like getting rid of the carried interest loophole in return for that, or some kind of a Wall Street transfer. So all sorts of things that could have formed a bipartisan compromise that didn't crash the deficit and set us back for decades. But they just took this huge reckless step, and every study that comes back in terms of what's happening with corporations and their capital investment, they're not turning this tax windfall into capital investments. They're not putting it into wages. They're moving things offshore still. They're not reinvesting in the United States. It was all a cruel, cruel joke that is going to take us many, many years to dig out of. And unfortunately it's going to require tax increases, and that's like the hardest thing to do in politics. So I don't have great answers for you on that. Susan asks, if Republicans had not named members to the intelligence committees, is there a mechanism to force them to do so? What about the other committees that aren't yet complete? So the good news is, at last, I think it was yesterday, they did name the Intelligence Committee members, and that definitely slowed down the Intel Committee in its ability to transfer transcripts to Robert Mueller and hopefully bring a new round of accountability for people that lie to Congress. That's important. I don't know if there's a mechanism where Speaker Pelosi could have maybe forced Republican membership, maybe reinstated the prior Congress's members. I don't know. Thankfully, we didn't have to go there because that would have been pretty ugly. You asked about other committees that haven't yet been organized. As far as I know, that was the last one. I think the only thing left to do is this select committee on the climate crisis, which has yet to be named, although we do know that it's going to be chaired by my colleague Kathy Castor from Florida. And I have reason to believe and hope that I will get a phone call telling me that I'm going to be on that select committee, but I don't yet know that. And that, I think, literally could happen any day now. Stephen asks, what are the prospects for a fix to the Affordable Care Act? I think the prospects for that are good, but I don't want to raise expectations that we're going to fix it as much as many of us would like. I mean, we want to restore some of the subsidies. We want to prevent the sabotaging actions that this administration has taken, such as shortening the enrollment period and redirecting dollars that were meant to inform the public about enrollment to self-serving ads bashing the Affordable Care Act. Some of the things they've done in the last couple of years to try to undermine the Affordable Care Act are shocking. Promoting these junk health plans, weakening of the quality standards. I think we can make progress on all of those things in this Congress. But I don't think we can probably go as far as a public option. And there's a few other things that are really needed, I think, to make the Affordable Care Act stronger. I think to do that we'll need a new president and probably a new Senate. Terry asks, please comment on U.S. intervention in Venezuela. Have you seen Ro Khanna's sign-on letter? Will I sign? If not, please issue a statement. I have not seen Ro Khanna's letter, but I would be surprised if I am not in agreement with Ro on this. I think the last thing in the world I want to see is a U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. We've got a very dark history of coups and industry-friendly interventions in Latin America that really have not helped our reputation in this hemisphere and have not helped the people in those countries where we've done it. At the same time, though, I got to be realistic. I feel terrible for the people of Venezuela. I think we've got a humanitarian crisis unfolding. We've got a very corrupt kleptocracy, authoritarian thug in office there. So I'm not going to pretend that Maduro's a nice guy. By all accounts, his re-election was one of those do not congratulate situations. But I can't think of another time where the United States has handpicked someone who was never elected and said, we're now going to recognize this person as the new leader, and we're going to direct all the assets of that country in the United States to accounts controlled by that person, and we're going to keep our diplomats in harm's way even if the elected president of that country orders them to leave. And those are really provocative actions that, to me, seem like they're setups for military conflict. And also, I think they're playing games with our diplomats in some really dangerous and irresponsible ways. So I don't want a coup, but I want to see progress for the people of Venezuela. I'd like to see a peaceful election, transfer of power, and I will take a look at Ro Khanna's letter and see if it's something that I can support.
Thank you.
David asks, are you doing or can be done to protect veterans? What am I doing to protect veterans from efforts to privatize the VA? So I oppose privatization of the VA. And got a lot of veterans in my district. We do a ton of veteran casework up and down the North Coast. It's not all pretty when it comes to the care and the service that they get. And I hear a lot of complaints about bureaucracy and the red tape, and sometimes the burden of having to travel all the way to Fort Miley, only to get there and discover that somebody wrote down the wrong day, or, you know, just some horror stories about the incompetence and the delays and things like that we're constantly working on. But the one thing I never hear complaints from my veterans about is the care they get. The VA is exceptionally good at providing that care. And if we can address the wait times and the administrative incompetence and bureaucracy issues, which I think we're making some progress on, then I think the VA is going to be good for the long haul, and I support it. I think we may, how many more questions, Jane? All right, we're getting there. Nancy is asking, what are you doing to counter the White House travel ban, zero tolerance border policies, and the slashing of the U.S. refugee resettlement system? I'm doing as much as I can as one member of Congress in one House of Congress. I am certainly writing letters with colleagues opposing all of these things. I am co-sponsoring legislation. Now that we have a majority in the House, we will definitely be having hearings that should have been taking place last year on family separation and refugee and asylum issues. This terrible abrupt change in asylum policy that the Trump administration is just unilaterally rolling out. That's not a good thing. We got to push back, but we need help on this. And I think the public needs to kind of weigh in and make sure that members of Congress, including Republicans, know that this is not okay. I'll keep co-sponsoring and being as active as I can be. But please, somebody talked about signing petitions and writing letters and things. This is a great example of something that members of Congress need to just hear from people all over the United States, that this is not my country, separating kids from parents and doing these detention centers and making asylum applicants wait in other countries under terrible conditions. These are all things we all have to push back against. It's reported that the island of plastic in the Pacific is larger than the state of Texas, which is harming fish life. Is Congress doing anything to control or eradicate this trash in the oceans? This is a question from Don. Congress has done nothing about the Pacific Gyre and about our plastic pollution problem, but I'm happy to tell you that for the first time in as long as I've been there, we're going to finally hold hearings about it, and I am all for good ideas on what we can do about it. It is a complex issue, all right? I don't know that we can actually do much about the plastic that's already accumulated in the middle of the ocean. There was a heroic effort by someone to develop these high-tech booms that you would drag through the gyre and hopefully strain out the plastic. And I think they lasted for a couple hours and they broke down and had to be towed back to Hawaii. So I don't know that any of us can hope for a physical fix to what's already there. But we need to take a look upstream at the problem, at the packaging that we see, the ubiquitous plastic everywhere that we don't need, the single-use plastic bags and straws, and as much as people kind of roll their eyes when you talk about something like banning plastic straws, we can live without plastic straws. I am all for the leadership that we've seen at the state level and many of my local government colleagues who are passing ordinances and bans to try to reduce all these unnecessary single-use plastic items. And then the product stewardship community is constantly working on standards. We've got some real pioneers in this area. Patty Garbarino at Marin Recycling is one of the nation's leaders in trying to reduce the use of unnecessary plastic in just all sorts of things that we consume. So I think that's kind of the universe of the challenge. What I can do at the federal level, I'm not sure. Most of the things you think about in that regard are like state and local ordinances. But I'm open. If there's a federal solution to this, I'll keep thinking about it and working on it. We'll hear from some experts at the hearings that we have, and maybe we'll get some good ideas. Fern asks, what progress can be made on gun control? Raise the age requirements, universal background checks, reinstate the assault weapons ban. Your follow-up questions kind of provided some of the answers that I would give, because I think those are obvious actions we can take on gun control. And this is another one where the change to the Democratic majority in the House is a world of difference. So my colleague Mike Thompson in Sonoma is the leader of the Gun Violence Task Force, and for the last several years, he has had a bill to do the most basic thing, to just provide a really reliable universal background check system. And he's gotten about 200 co-sponsors, so that's a handful of Republicans, not many, but one or two. And he wasn't able to get to the threshold of actually having hearings or vote, and we were never able to do anything. In this Congress, I think he's already got 230 co-sponsors. So we need 218 to pass, so this bill will pass the House of Representatives and will put a lot of heat on the United States Senate, and that's just a whole different dynamic, a whole different agenda, because the majority flipped in the House. So I'm pretty excited about that. How far beyond background checks we'll be able to go, I don't know. I do support an assault weapons ban. I do support looking at things like standard, age requirements for assault rifles, like what the state of Florida finally did after the Parkland disaster. And I support a lot of the other things that we've done here in California without eliminating the Second Amendment, but keeping communities safer. I'm not sure how many of those things right now will be able to pass through the House, but you'll see me co-sponsoring all of it and more. Okay? I think with that, we're at the last question. So congratulations, Gail, you've got the last question. And Gail asked, in this negatively charged political climate, how can you stay current but not become angry and obsessed with the downfall of Trump? I love that.
You can't.
I know. I was going to say. If any of you figure this one out, will you please let me know? Look, I think you just got to have faith that as bad as it seems in this moment in this country, it's pretty dark. I outlined some of my concerns for you at the beginning of our town hall tonight. We've come through some other pretty dark times. And this country, while not perfect, is really good at these periodic corrections that are necessary to kind of keep us on track. I feel like we're in the middle of one of those right now. And so I guess my suggestion is try to take that bigger view. Try to have some faith that having come through all these really dark times, I mean, my God, slavery and Reconstruction and the Great Depression and World War II and all of the McCarthyism, I mean, that was pretty ugly stuff, right? Having come through all that, despite years of ugliness that we had to live through to get to the correction, we've always made it through. And I, for one, continue to believe that we're going to make it through this too. Don't take it for granted. Stay vigilant. Keep showing up to town halls. Make sure people vote. Don't turn into Howard Schultz, is that his name? Not Howard Schultz. Who's the Starbucks guy? Yeah, that guy. Okay. But I think we're going to get through this, and I'm so proud of this district and my constituents for everything you do. I hope you'll join me at another town hall, and I thank you for spending your time.